Welcome to the RHE podcast. I am Rob Schock in Bakersfield, California.
So Isaiah, thank you for joining us today, calling out of Korea.
So we've had some bumps and bruises along the way trying to get this podcast going, haven't we?
Yeah, you know what? It's actually been quite a learning process, and I've been very grateful for the experience because it's really challenged me to think about some things, and I've had to buy a lot of equipment to make sure that I had the proper setup. So I think we're in a good position now. What do you think?
I think so. I think we can get it going. We were going to have a guest, but that didn't turn out to work out too well. Um, but we will be having her again,
Yeah,
so stay tuned for that.
her family actually got into a really bad car accident. So
Yeah,
kind of just, I think her parents like totaled their car, and but they're okay, so that's good.
it's like
That's good to hear.
I feel bad for even asking her to do anything because it's like everything has been so
Yeah.
terrible for everybody, and then on top of that, you have to go through that kind of a thing.
Well, the one good news is that with the vaccinations coming out, that it looks like the coronavirus could be ending the pandemic within the next few months, or at least be severely reduced.
Yeah, there's a lot of. Oh, I got to tell you the story.
Okay.
Um, so part of my regular job, my day job, is like I go to the post office in the morning
Hmm.
and to pick up mail for my work, and um, while waiting for my work, there was a couple of nice ladies in there, just nice old ladies. They weren't really old, but they were older than me. Um, and one of them wasn't wearing a mask.
Right.
And she was talking to the other lady, and the other lady asked her to please keep your distance.
Hmm.
And she says, "Oh, don't you know the pandemic is a hoax?"
Wow. I can't believe that. I mean, probably by the end of the year, we're going to be close to 400,000 people dead, and there's still people are still saying it's a hoax. I can't even believe it.
I know, and it was just it just kept going and going. She started like after we kind of like insisted, "Hey, could you just wear a mask anyway?"
Hmm.
She started saying things like, "I can't wear a mask because breathing your own carbon dioxide is bad for you." Um,
Yeah, I'm sure that's not a good thing, but
then she started talking about how the media is owned by the elites, and like okay, that's sort of true, but
yeah, definitely true.
I wonder what her idea of what the elites are.
Yeah.
um,
Well, the media is owned by corporations, so they
yes,
have their own agenda.
profit
This is,
motivated corporate.
yeah,
Yeah,
right wing, left
corporation.
wing.
Yes,
At the end of the day, money is the god for both wings.
yes,
So
exactly.
they have
And
their agenda they want to push.
well, they're not really pushing an agenda. They're just trying to attract the attention so that
Right, right. Well, that
advertisers
is
will
an
pay them
agenda.
money.
Right. That is an agenda, is what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
they want to sensationalize things and take things out of context and present half of the side of the story, and they never really give you the full picture.
They're exploiting certain psychological aspects of society
Right,
in order to make more money, basically, to keep stockholders buying
right.
yachts and stuff like that.
I learned in middle school that half the truth is a great lie. So I think they're very guilty of that because they don't necessarily like tell flat out lies, but they only present one side of the story, which it might as well be a lie, just to get people watching.
It's only possible to present any side of the story at any given time. There's no way to present all possible sides of the story. So you got to pick one, and you got to pick one that people will be interested in
Hmm. Hmm.
and will relate to. Our next guest is a writer, and she writes stories, and I I want to be a writer too.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of study storytelling, and
Mm-hmm.
basically that's what it's about. It's about
Mm-hmm.
trying to gain the perspective of your audience,
Right.
and the news has to tell whatever story's happening from that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise they're not going to get an audience.
Right.
You
That's
know what
very
I'm saying?
true.
But anyway,
Speaking of
that
audience, so what's our topic for this week, Rob?
well, I believe that you would like us to think about what the our weakest positions are. Is that it?
Well, the weakest sides of our positions, because for the last couple of times we've gone one on one, we've been trying to poke holes in the other side's argument. And
So
so
are we
I
trying
thought
to
it
poke
would be
holes in our own argument?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Poke holes. And I had a really good time discussing Christianity and kind of presenting some ideas that I don't necessarily maybe agree with, but just kind of throwing some stuff out there. I like to entertain different things sometimes. Before I start, I have a very big caveat, and I do want to reason by analogy. But have you ever seen like these ant colonies that they pump the concrete in there and they see how the ants have built their colony?
Hmm.
So I was watching one and they pumped like 20,000 gallons of concrete into this thing. I mean, it was gigantic. It was a metropolis.
Right.
The ants, they had developed some kind of like highways, and I mean they had like gardens in there and they had compost. So it was quite complex, right? So if I were to take one of those ants out and I were to show them a skyscraper, they would say like, this is a ridiculous arrangement you have here, because and then they would go on and on about, hey, you guys should have been building in the ground. Now you're going to be subjected to predators, blah 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 blah. They're going to say, this material you guys are using, you can't bite down on it. And they might, if we're comparing the two, they might think in a certain way, right, about a skyscraper. But of course, as humans, we think that's ridiculous. As an ant, obviously, that makes sense for them to build that way. But reasoning from that, I'm kind of just like an ant here, and I'm thinking to a much superior being. So whatever I might raise is just kind of like the way that I see things from my perspective. And it doesn't mean at all that if I had more information, I might think something totally different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. What you're saying is like you're giving the from the ant's perspective, we would appear to be gods, uh, um, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like, and so is that a weakness? And what argument is
No,
a weakness in?
no, that's not an argument. I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
saying whatever I say, I may question some things about the Bible. And the reality is, like, there is a story in the Bible, Job, where Job questions God, and then God just starts eviscerating him.
Yeah,
He just
yeah.
destroys Job, and Job literally covers his mouth, and he's like, I'm not even going to say anything else because.
Uh,
So I believe if I were to say these things and God would appear in front of me, he would start talking about things like quantum mechanics and black holes and material, being created out of nothing, how he did that. And I wouldn't have an answer to anything I would just say, I'm sorry, shut up. I'm going to go back to my room. I'm going to get
okay.
back on the internet or something like that. So that being said, one of the biggest problems that I see, that I think people have, one of the biggest objections to, is that in the old, and Khaled mentioned this, is that like in the Old Testament there seems to be a lot of slaughter and stuff going on. Let's say, so God gave Israel the promised land, as we know Israel, but there were people living there, so the people there had to die. It's so from someone's perspective, they might look at that and say, well, God, like, why do you got to go down this route? Like, it doesn't seem like you're being very you're showing mercy to these people. And if people don't believe in God because of that, I would say, I get it, I understand. Like, you have to engage in a certain level of cognitive dissonance to try to reason that away.
the belief in God away
No, like, to justify that,
to
you have to
justify.
engage in some kind of cognitive dissonance. You know,
Okay,
one way to one extent or another. Do you think? Do you agree with that, Rob?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Okay,
Um,
so if you listen to apologists, Christian apologists, one of the things that they'll say, because God's ordering the killing of children, they'll say, well, it doesn't really matter if God ordered them to kill the children because the children are going to go up to heaven anyway. So it's better for them to die as children than to grow up in this immoral society.
uh,
You see what I'm saying? But in order to say that, you'd have to stop and say, like, okay, so let's just assume that's true. God would have to ask these people to go and physically kill people. You know what I mean? Kill children. Like if God asked me to physically kill the child, I'd be like, no, there's no way I'm going to do that. I don't care if you order me to or not. I'm just not going to do that. Period.
so this is this a problem of evil thing?
No, I wouldn't say it's a problem of evil. I wouldn't say that at all. It might be I think it's a problem of perspective. Again, though, because
Like,
ultimately, maybe there is some kind of greater good that's being accomplished. Like for example, imagine that if God knew that Hitler was going to be born in this village, but he specifically didn't know what the kid would be. And so you had to go in there and slaughter everyone, and you could be accomplishing the greater good by just killing everyone and not allowing Hitler to be born.
right, it's the whole thing is that you wouldn't be able to understand the mind of God. How do you think you could understand the motives of God? From, like you said, the ant's eye perspective. What's bad for the ant might be good for the whole universe.
Right, right.
Yeah. Is that a conundrum as a believer,
Yeah,
though?
I believe it is.
I mean, because if I'm a believer, that's just like, I'm just like slam dunk right there, Like, of course, we're ants to God. Things might seem bad to us,
Hmm.
and however, we don't understand we can't possibly understand what the good is, what the
Hmm.
true
Hmm.
is. And
The true, true.
that's why I never thought the problem of evil it was really that big of a problem, because first of all you got to say, okay, there's such a thing as evil, and then you got to say, okay, so how do I know what evil is?
Right.
you know
And
and you can't.
exactly,
You
exactly,
can only put it in what's bad, in the perspective of what's bad for you, or what
exactly.
seems bad to you.
Right.
Like, children innocent children suffering and dying. That seems bad to me, but I suppose to the all powerful shaper and designer of the universe, there's an ultimate good for that.
Right. And Rob, whenever you were questioning Christianity, you actually posed that question about the problem of evil, and that is easily, I would say, the easiest one for me to try to answer,
Hmm.
because I do understand the mechanics of that one quite a bit better. The problem is, though, is whenever you mention something like this, you got to understand that, like, God could have, and maybe should have had the foreknowledge to know that if he records himself, like, going around and doing these things, like, there's going to be people who don't believe in him as a result of that. For me, that's the reason why it's harder to justify whatever happens, because let's just assume that God needed to do that stuff, right? Like, would it be necessary for him to have to tell the whole world about it? Couldn't he have just, like, okay, I had to do this, and now, you don't need to hear about all of this stuff? And that, in its sense, though, is also, like, really affirms that there is a God, because when I read the Bible, it's like there's no one's trying to hide what's happening. Even the heroes like David, they do some really messed up stuff. David killed the husband of a woman he was having an affair with to hide his pregnancy with her. So
Right.
like they kind of just put everything out in the open and kind of like, hey, this happened, and kind of like just like deal with it. So that is actually one of the things that does make the Bible more believable to me, honestly.
To the perspective of us ants, all
Right,
that terrible stuff, and the Bible just kind of like just spells that out, that all this
right,
terrible stuff is for a greater good.
yeah,
Especially the Old Testament definitely spells that out,
right. It's
you
like
know?
tough crop. If you don't believe it, if you don't like it, you don't believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what would you say would be the number one weakness that you would have as in the atheist position? I think we touched a bit on it already, Rob.
Okay, go ahead and tell me what we touched on. Oh, what we
Well,
just talked about, the problem of evil.
no, there were several times in our discussion, which I really appreciated it, where you're just like, well, I really don't have a good answer for that. Like,
Yeah.
okay, like if you're gonna ask ultimately what the kind of meaning is for life, it's like, have you ever read or saw Waiting for Godot?
No, I never saw that, no.
But you're familiar with what it is, Sam Beckett?
I don't know. I really don't. I've heard of the title. That's all. That's about as far as I know about it.
Incidentally, do you remember the movie Quantum Leap or the show?
The TV show.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was telling you that was like one of my favorite ones. Well, the guy's name is the same name of the on there. His name is Sam Beckett, and that was the author. But anyway, so Sam Beckett is the guy who wrote that story, and in that story, it's basically like two guys just really not. They're just talking. They're waiting for someone who never comes.
I think I have heard of the story actually.
They're just having some philosophical musings along the way, but then the climax should be this guy Godot coming. And I think one of the reasons why he wrote it, he never really clarified why he wrote it like it. It's just kind of an absurdity, like a reductionist writing, you know. But it's just kind of like he was showing the absurdity of just everything of life. You're trying to find and assign meaning to something that never really happens.
Yeah. I think when trying to think about, okay, so what would you say my position is exactly? That my position is, God. There's no God. There's no such thing as gods, right?
Right?
And I base that position on just kind of a sort of an epistemological kind of position where I can only know what exists. I can only say I know something exists if, in fact, I have evidence
Hmm.
for that actually existing. Otherwise,
Hmm.
I'm gonna just believe in ridiculous things, and maybe it's fun to believe in those things. Like my son said to me, we're making it pretty clear that there's no such thing as Santa Claus, right? But
Hmm.
we're not trying to rob him of the Santa Claus experience. So we're playing the Santa Claus thing, and he says to us, I want Santa Claus to be real, and I said, well, that's okay, that's fine, that's great. If you want Santa Claus to be real, then we will say that Santa Claus is real.
Hey, it is Christmas time, but I want to ask you, did your parents ever do the whole Santa Claus is real thing to you?
Yeah, yeah, they did. Hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
so as ministers' kids, there's like my parents. There's no way that crap is real. It was never even remotely like brought. But I would have loved. I mean, I look back and I would have loved to have that experience as a child. And
Yeah,
I'm definitely going to do that for my daughter. I honestly feel like it's one of the ways that our parents robbed us growing up. They didn't let us trick or treat or even remotely
oh,
give the
that's terrible.
idea that I know it's horrible. I didn't trick or treat till I was 18, and by that time
Oh,
I only got like five candies because
and a
No
lot
one
of
wanted to give an 18-year-old guy a candy.
yeah, a lot of sideways looks, like it's too old for trick or treating, you moocher.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it. I gotta tell you though, and like I can't speak to like the wider experience, but
Hmm.
I don't think it's all that cracked up to me because you it makes you kind of suspicious of your parents. Especially, it made me suspicious of my parents because
Really?
well, they didn't do a good job of hiding it.
Oh, really?
It's like like they would never admit that Santa Claus wasn't real, but
Wow.
it was obvious what was going on, and
Wow.
and so as a kid, you're like, all right, so what else are they lying to me about?
Right. Well,
So
I don't know. I
which
think if you think about this, there's only a certain amount of time where you're going to be that gullible, where you can believe in anything. And so as a child, I would say it would be best just to have that time as innocent as possible and believing in magic and things like that. That would be a fun thing, because obviously you and I are never going to believe in Santa Claus, you know. So there's
sure,
like a
but
small window. I would say there's a small window, and I'm going to take massive advantage of it for my daughter. Let's just say that.
and it's fun to behave as if you do believe in those things,
Hmm.
and that's why I'm totally on board with doing that for my son. If he wants us to behave as
Hmm.
if Santa Claus is real, then we're totally going to do that for him.
Wow. So
Um,
Rob, so what I was asking you was, would you say that that is probably the number one or number two greatest weakness? Because ultimately, let me put myself in your position for just 2 seconds, okay? I would be devastated beyond words if, like, if my child died, for example. I couldn't
yes.
even put it into words or function
Hmm.
if I thought for 2 seconds that this was going to be my last interaction. It's like I would rather believe in the Santa Claus. I would rather believe that than to hold on to that brutal reality. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, reality is brutal, isn't it? We would definitely love to believe that the world is better than it is.
Hmm.
And it is a hard thing to face, the world as
Hmm.
it is. And I know we're trying to poke out weaknesses
Hmm.
in our position, but ultimately, my position is death exists.
Hmm.
Death is real.
Hmm.
We die, and when we're dead, we're dead. That's why I don't believe. I would love to believe that my life not only goes on, but it will become so much better than it is now. But it's simply not true.
Well, you don't know that that's not true. I mean, you don't believe that that's not true, but that doesn't mean it is or isn't true. You said it's simply not true. You don't know what's going to happen after you die,
As
because
far as
you don't
far
know what's going to happen after you die, Rob, period. Because if you know that, by the time you realize what's going to happen after you're dead, then it's going to be too late for you to do anything,
well,
right?
you don't know what's going to happen after we die either, right? So basically, what is the my weakest position in the
I'm asking you,
in the
like, what do you
belief
think?
that yeah, I'm asking myself right now.
Hmm.
I'm asking
Hmm.
myself. So what is in the my belief that death exists? That's a very good question. What is my weakest position in that? Just simply that I don't know that it definitely does exist, and
That
therefore
you have so much uncertainty.
it is uncertain
Hmm.
because it is. I don't really think it's that certain. I think uncertain. I think there's a lot of evidence supporting once our bodies cease to function, it all shuts off.
Well, I don't know what evidence in the world you could ever produce that would make you believe that, because
Well,
we don't have any way of knowing that, is what I'm saying. It's so uncertain.
we don't
that
we
you just have
and
no
you're
way of
right,
knowing?
we have no way of, and maybe that is a weakness in the argument,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
There will never be any first person account. Nobody's ever going to come back
Yeah, right.
and say, oh no,
This is what happens.
this is definitely, it's done.
Uh-huh.
Because even if somebody did, even if you like resuscitated somebody and they came back and they said there was nothing, because, of course, we've had people who come back and say, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I saw these lights, and I saw
Right.
my loved ones, and so on and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. So basically, I guess that's the weakness in my position, that but that's the weakness but it's the same weakness in your position.
Well, I don't agree with that in the slightest sense of the word, but
But
at
everything you
least
but everything you said to me is true about your belief, that you
uh
you don't know that. You can't say that for sure. So therefore, why should you believe that?
okay, so here's, I guess you can say, I want to get into this wasn't one of the top ones, but let's just say this. One of the things that Christians do to explain other religions is to say that like Satan is involved in deceiving people, right?
Hmm.
And so we might discount some things like let's say for example the Quran. Quran was written by an illiterate goat herder, right? So how in the heck could he write this book?
Right.
We don't really have like an, unless someone came in and helped him to write it. There's no real way he could have done that. So one thing that Christians might say is like, okay, well maybe demons helped him or the devil helped him, right?
Right.
So if you were to flip that argument back on Christians and say, well, hey, Hinduism is the right religion, and Jesus was just trying to distract people away from the one true religion, and all these miracles he did. And even actually, the Pharisees accused Jesus of doing this. That they said, "You're doing these miracles by the power of Satan because you're trying to deceive people." That argument was even used against him in his own day. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, I guess you can say, I think you would be able to, if you flip that argument back onto me, I would say, well, I really don't know. I know that I've experienced Jesus Christ. I know that he's spoken to me. I know he's done miracles in my life in front of me. And so in that sense, I am 1 billion%, like 1 billion% true that Jesus Christ is real.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, if you did flip that argument, I would have to say, well, yeah, it could be possibly true that I was deceived by some other being, and I wouldn't know how to argue that one way or the other.
Or you were deceived by your own self. You were
No,
self-deceived.
no,
Oh, but that's a real thing that happens all the time. It happens to me. I deceive myself constantly, and um, I don't mean to, I don't want to, but sometimes I don't really know myself as well as I think I do.
mm-hmm,
That's just all I'm saying. Is I'm not saying that this is true, but just as you're saying that you could have been deceived by the devil,
mm-hmm.
you could have also been deceived by your your own self.
No, no.
Yes.
Okay, Rob, let me ask you a question. Okay, I'm gonna set up a scenario that happened to me when I was in the Philippines. Okay, I want your honest to God opinion on this. What happened? Okay, I went into the Philippines for some very nefarious reasons that I don't want to get into, but it was not good intentions. I went down there, but I did wind up volunteering in the slums while I was there because I was like I felt so guilty about what I was doing, and I'm like I want to do something good with my time and money. So I wound up giving away all my money, and then I wound up going going to leave. And by the time I got to the airport, they told me I needed to pay an exit fee. I didn't have the money because I gave it all away. They wouldn't accept my credit card. They wouldn't accept. They didn't have an ATM machine. I pleaded. I begged with them. I asked all the passengers. Nobody helped me out. Right. So I looked in my bags. My bags are totally empty because I gave away all my jewelry and clothes and shoes and everything. As I realized I was going to miss this flight, I was like, okay, man, I'm gonna miss this flight. I went to put on my backpack, and I took like one step, and something told me, I something said to me, look inside of your bag one more time. And I rolled my eyes, and I'm like, I have looked in my bag 3 times already. I know nothing's in there. I unzipped my bag, and there was one note and one coin that equaled the exact amount that I needed to catch that flight.
Hmm.
So I paid it. I ran. I was out of breath. And I sat there and I said, I know God exists right now because I know something spoke to me, and I know that bag was empty 1 minute before I looked into it. And I didn't become a Christian then. I mean, I was very content sleeping around and drinking, but at that moment, I knew God existed beyond any reasonable doubt. So, what would be a naturalistic explanation for that?
So basically, what you're saying is that there is no other way to explain that
Right.
possible. There's no other possible way to explain that other than that God must have did it. I can understand that. I can understand how something could seem as if it has no other possible explanation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It seems likely that you might have missed something. You know, I mean, if you're gonna place the bets, if you're gonna tell me, if you're gonna ask me the question, what was more likely, that God did it, or that there's something that we did not account for that happened,
Mm-hmm.
that was physically possible, that could have uh, uh, happened other than miraculous means, I'm gonna say that there probably is something we didn't account for
Okay,
there.
that's fair enough. I know what it meant to me, and I
Of
know that
course.
I heard something speak to me. So I wouldn't ever use that as an argument for you though. It's just something that I personally know.
Well,
But
you
actually,
asked, and that's the thing. I wouldn't even said anything. Because that was your personal experience.
hmm
It doesn't matter to me really.
hmm
Um,
hmm
if that proves to you that God exists, then I am, I'm glad for that.
right,
I can't dispute that
right,
because that was your personal experience.
right. And just so you know, I didn't tell anyone about that for 7 years, and I mean, I didn't. I didn't become a Christian for a full 7 years after that because I wanted to live the way that I wanted to live. But anyway, I want to get on to probably my next second. I would say the weakest part about Christianity, the fact that a hell exists, or in the scriptures. That to me, it does seem to go against any kind of concept of mercy because if you accept that God's a merciful God, then like a mercy would be like a mercy killing, like throw someone in the fire, they get vaporized, and then they're done. Like their punishment would be that they don't get eternal life. That
Like
would
in
seem,
Infinity War, Thanos called what he was doing mercy,
yeah, 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 in a
because he
sense.
was he was just making it so that half of everybody just ceased to exist. No more,
Mm-hmm,
no pain, and then
mm-hmm,
everyone who's left flourishes,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm. In that sense, if we, some Christians reason through this and they say, well, God wants you to have that choice, da 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 da. But then you really get down to, well, why does God want to do that in the first place? He creates people, and there's no way that he needs to have these people around, because if you're a perfect being, you certainly don't need 100 billion people who have lived in the planet since our history. There's been something like over 100 billion people. So even if you did need to create people, you could have created like 1,000 people, and then okay, only half of them come to you. So if there's 500, and then okay, now you've only had to send 500 people to hell. But if we follow the math on the people who have come to Jesus, even right now, even the best numbers have Christianity at like 33% maybe of the world. And then even that, there's Christians who believe, or there's Protestants who believe Catholics aren't going to go to heaven, and then the other way around. So you really wind up with a really small amount of people by even your own argument who are going to make it into heaven. So it seems like a lot more suffering is being brought about, and the worst kind of suffering because it's eternal. I can kind of explain away some suffering we see on the earth, but we're talking about eternal punishment. So I can't really give an argument of why it's necessary to continue to punish someone. And even furthermore, like I'll take that argument furthermore. If my daughter thought that you were her father and she was calling you father, I would just want to die. If my
Sure.
daughter was confused on who was her father, I would never think that that's something that she should be punished for. I would say I failed as a father. You know what I
See.
mean?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's one of
So
the things I have a hard time wrapping my mind around because I do think about us being God's children, and I do think there's a million other gods out there. So why was God so ambiguous whenever He revealed Himself?
the whole jealous God issue has always been interesting to me,
Hmm.
because I always thought, like, okay, as an atheist, like, what kind of a God would really care what you believed one way or the other? Does it really, we're talking about an incomprehensible being,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's the belief. And the same way that we can't comprehend why there's evil in the world,
Hmm.
um, why, if all that is true, why would it even matter to him what we believe
Right,
one way
right.
or the other? He's What's going to happen to us is what's going to happen to us,
Hmm.
whether we believe in it or not. you
Hmm.
know, if I'm going to believe in a God, it definitely wouldn't believe in a God that would just send you to some sort of eternal damnation for uh, just just for jealousy. Just like, oh well, you didn't believe in me, so you're going to hell, and that's it. And it's like, okay,
Like really?
it's like,
Like really?
and that's basically, when it comes to organized religion,
Uh-huh.
the believing in God part becomes the most important thing often, and especially like when the religion, the organized religion becomes more powerful as kind of a state almost.
Uh-huh.
um, then the lack of, if you don't believe in God, not only are you damned,
Hmm.
you're going to be put to death. You know,
Well, not put to death. I mean, death, once again, death would be like, okay, you're gonna kill someone? All right, fine. Yeah, I could get that, but what kind of good would be to punish someone for all eternity? That's what I can't wrap my mind around, you know?
yeah,
Like I
yeah.
would get if you're gonna kill someone, okay, God's gonna kill you, and I could get on board with that shit, but then
Well, I'm saying you'll be put to death by the state. A religious state will use that to basically oppress people. You don't believe in God, therefore you're not part of the state. You're not part of. You don't get to live, basically.
uh-huh.
Uh,
What's another weakness you find in atheism?
okay, well, okay, let's talk about atheism for a while, for
Hmm.
for a minute, okay? Because
Hmm.
atheism is an identity, is kind of a weird thing, right? People who tend to identify themselves as atheists, the kind of group think that they often criticize other
Hmm.
religions
Uh-huh.
of having. And I don't like the whole. I would definitely, like, I would take my atheist fellows to task for being so rude about it. Like,
Hmm.
there's this sense of, I don't know, I guess superiority,
Hmm.
this kind of superiority complex that
Hmm.
some atheists might display, like as if they're the smart ones. Um,
You mean like the anti-theist type?
it's more like, I believe in atheism because I'm smart and you believe in God because you're dumb. I don't think it takes a smart person to be an atheist. In fact, I've known some very, very dumb atheists. Um,
Well,
um,
generally speaking, I will just say this. Generally speaking, my experience has been that atheists are, on average, more studied than Christians because of the fact that it takes a lot of critical thinking to start to reject the idea of God. So it's one of those things that like your parents
does it though?
aren't going to teach you that. Well, like your parents aren't going to teach you that. For the most part, people have parents who have some kind of religious beliefs, right? So in order to reject that, you need to start thinking about some of these philosophical problems. So it doesn't mean like, trust me, I've met some idiot atheists as well. I've met brilliant Christians. I've met idiot Christians. I've met Christians who have no rhyme or reason behind the kind of arguments that they make. And I'll tell you what, it upsets me as a believer to see people making bad arguments for God. Because I'm like, you're causing disbelief this way by making stupid arguments like this. By arguing, for example, that the earth is only 6,000 years old. I just face plant and I'm like, do not make these kind of arguments. These we're going to get eviscerated if you're trying to argue with an astrophysicist, or physicist. So
Well,
that's
and
something I
here
hate to.
and here's the thing, right? Picking on any particular belief, like the Earth is only 6,000 years old,
Hmm.
is not an argument against God existing.
Hmm.
It's not an argument against believing in God per se. It's an argument. It's an argument against having that aspect of the belief.
Hmm.
You know,
That's true.
it's an argument against the Bible being literally true. And I say I don't really think it's that terrible of a thing for somebody who believes in God to also believe that the Bible may not be 100% true, or it might not even be mostly true. But that's not what belief in God is about. It's not about what a book says, it's just about your personal experience in life, your personal
Hmm.
perspective, what you want out of life, and what you see
Hmm.
life as being.
Right.
And you can use anything to justify that. You don't need a Bible. You could have some, space underwear or something like that.
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying.
Space Jam, whenever Bugs Bunny gives the people the water, and he's like, this water is going to make you like invincible on the court, and they drink it and they all get all big and stuff, and he's like, hey, it's just water. But it's kind of like a placebo effect is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's like, when atheists get all like, oh, what about this part in the Bible? How does that make any sense? Checkmate, and it's like, well, okay, so what? That doesn't, that's not an argument against God existing.
I will say this, that for the most part, I found atheists to be very talking down, as you said. Like one, they'll talk down, or two is that
Smug.
they'll try to present their arguments and not act as though their arguments don't have equal amount of flaws in them. Like for example, I briefly touched on this before, but we're kind of talking about the Big Bang, and I said, let's just assume that that's true, that everything went down the way that you said it is. You know, that would be a very, even if I agree, granted that went down exactly the way that you said, that there's no way you would be able to observe that. That's still a pretty far fetched idea, you know?
Well, either way, the Big Bang is not an argument against God. Saying, "Oh, the Big Bang exists." That's not even an argument against God existing, because,
Right.
okay, so all right, sometime before the Big Bang happened, whatever before means, before time even exists, a cosmic squid,
Hmm.
squirted out a jet of ink, and the universe was produced, and that's where the Big Bang came from, and and it's
Right,
like,
right.
or God or whatever,
Yeah.
um,
Either
so
way, the point of me saying that is either way, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or if you're an atheist, we're gonna run into philosophical bedrock that we just cannot, and we all we have is shovels, and we're trying
mhm,
to bang into. We're limited. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
I mean, I do want to present one more of the biggest weaknesses I would find about Christianity. There is such an open interpretation to so much of the Bible. Like, you will find people with the largest, vast difference of beliefs based on the Bible, because some of it is written ambiguously, and then some of it, unless you're like a scholar who knows Greek and Hebrew and all of the references of the ancient times, there's no way you're going to be able to understand it. I can guarantee you take your average Christian, you flip them over to the Old Testament, and you just start reading sections out of it. For one example, is they use different measures that are totally different, you know? And
right,
so then they also talk about things like the cedars of Lebanon, which were like, that would be the equivalent of us saying like sequoia trees, right?
yes,
But unless you knew that the cedars in Lebanon were giant, there's no way your average Joe Blow is going to have any idea of what they're talking about. You know what I
right,
mean?
yeah,
So, in one sense, I kind of understand why the Catholics say it's not really good for anybody to read the Bible on their own because you're going to screw up the interpretation of it so badly. It's better that we just tell you what it says.
right,
I
exactly,
understand some reasoning behind that, because otherwise, what the alternative of that is that you have 50,000 different sects of Christianity, you know. And if you take a look at like Scientology, you don't have like 50 sects of Scientology. You just have like Scientology. But the point is that if I think if I were to write a book, I would make it, first of all, I'd make it a lot shorter. Okay. Some things are repeated 3, 4 times, like the Gospels. It's like, what's the sense of needing to repeat them 4 different times? Like, make one gospel, here's what happened, let's go on to the next point. So, one, it gets confusing for people. And then two, it's at least vague or ambiguous to the point to where people could believe, I mean, all over the place, you know. There's nothing even remotely, I guess if you call it like mere Christianity, that your average people would just believe on. Your average believers, it's a very small amount. Let's just say that. So
yeah.
how you live out your life, what's the government's role or Christianity's role in the government? It's just a lot of guessing, you know, at the end of the day. And if it wasn't written so ambiguously, you would expect to people agree on a lot more things.
Have you read Thomas Jefferson's abridged version of the Bible?
No,
Have
but I know about it.
you heard about that? Yeah, I've never read it either. I always wanted to check it out, but I don't know. I never think about it, I guess. um,
What do you think about that argument, Rob?
when it comes to the Bible, I think every person's dialogue is going to be with it is going to be their own personal experience with as is with any other um, dialogue that you have with any written works. When whether it's like Plato or J.K. Rowling or the Bible, um, there's always going to be like a sort of personal experience when it comes to it, and especially when it comes to like really old ones like the Bible, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or the Iliad and the Odyssey or Hesiod. It's difficult to know what the context of the
Right,
time that was written. It
right,
always is.
right.
And of course, when it comes to the belief that God wrote this thing, that this was in fact penned by God Himself,
Mm-hmm.
um, then it's like, whoa, okay, so now we have now we're ants trying to read God's work, and
Right.
God's trying his best to, give his message to these ants. So then you got to say, okay, I guess, is God like humans to ants, where God doesn't even know God only observes what the ants are doing in their colony, but he doesn't really know how they communicate. Like we would try to like communicate with them with like pheromones or something,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
I would just say this. I would reduce it down to this. I would expect that a book written by the creator of all the universe and everything, I would expect it to have to be a lot more easy for people to not mess up. Let's just say, I would say he should have anticipated that people are going to take things out of context, for example, or misinterpret to that extent. You know what I mean?
So
So,
maybe God does not intend for most of us to really understand it, but then you get the danger of people coming out and being like, "Oh, it's me. I'm the one who really understands
mm-hmm,
it.
mm-hmm,
Listen to me, and I'll tell
mm-hmm,
you.
mm-hmm,
I'll transmit the true thoughts of God to y'all." It starts to become a cult, basically.
right. Exactly. That's actually exactly what David Koresh did, because he was actually an offshoot of like the most peaceful sect, which is like the Seventh Day Adventists. They don't even eat meat, you know. And so that's exactly what he said. Like, I'm really the only one who knows how to interpret this. So you guys all need to listen to me. And then we know. And then he winds up just sleeping with everyone's wife. You know what I mean? In the process. Those were the three biggest ones I had. But what would be another of the biggest weaknesses you find in the atheist position?
Yeah, I think there's insistence, and I guess this is why I don't really have this position, to be honest, is the insistence that other people must not believe in God. Um, and I don't really understand that position, because it's my point of view on this is that, we believe what we believe. Like I said, our own experiences in life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see what this is. I don't know if this is, because I don't know if this is one I'm going to talk about, really, because I don't know if it's really this, because this isn't even my position, you know.
Right, right. No, I get what you're saying, though. And to an extent, I would understand this if you're saying that, well, what we need no one to believe in religion because in a world, because that will at least unify us in what we believe. So, like, for example, I did go to North Korea and I did see some Buddhist temples, and they had been converted into like museums. And I totally get their line of logic that if we are trying to create a more perfect, prosperous society, like if that's your number one goal, then if you're trying to have communal living, then if it would be extremely hard to do that whenever you have Buddhists trying to live communally with Christians, with atheists, like that makes for a weird dynamic. If you had everyone as Christians or if everyone was Buddhist, then you have like the most underlying belief system. It has to be in unison, is what I'm saying. So I understand why atheists communists have tried to get away with religion, have tried to do away with religion because it's like the number one thing they think would divide people. You
I
agree
guess
with that?
I guess I'm just more of a secularist than an atheist, because um, I think that, as far as how our community should treat belief, um, it should always be with a standard of tolerance for alternative points of view,
Mm-hmm.
as long as we have standards against harm,
Uh-huh.
against
Yeah, that's good.
against causing insecurity amongst our population.
Right.
You know,
And you know what? I'll be honest, in a very real sense, I'm probably more secular than your average atheist because I don't want the government remotely involved in religion, because at all, like in the slightest sense of the word, because
Yeah,
I believe that it will actually harm religion. So it's, a lot of the right wing Republicans now they're saying like Joe Biden was anti God because we don't want like to force people to have to read the Bible in school, you know. But
right.
that's not at all that I don't want people to read the Bible. Like, no, I
Yeah,
want you to study the Bible.
they're
I
acting as
want you
if
to hit the Bible. And actually, I do want to say something else too. Is that I am writing like a version of the Bible that has like a lot more modern examples. For example, in the book of James, it talks about the tongue being like a fire, and like a fire can either destroy stuff or it can make it something harder. It could like purify metal, right? So I said like the tongue is like a like nuclear energy. It could either power a city or it could vaporize it. So because I do want people to be able to listen to and not be so confused, just trying to use more modern examples that people understand.
would this be like a treatise on the Bible, like um, sort of like an examination of it? Not maybe not an examination, but more like a oh, I don't know what the word is,
Well,
but
I'll tell you, it's like a cross between an actual translation and a commentary. Because many times, for example, the Bible is
commentary. That's what I meant to say. It's like a
it's
commentary.
it's quoting many times from the Old Testament. So kind of just throwing some references in there that the stuff that they're talking about. So I'm not like adding, I'm not like changing it. I'm just adding to it
Yeah.
a little bit more context, I would say.
Okay.
So
Well, I would be interested in seeing that.
yeah, I've made about seven of the books so far. So Rob, um, I want to ask you if you consider this to be a weak point, because there was a reason why I asked you the question about Adolf Hitler and about what would be your argument to him. Because I noticed in neither of those arguments that I told you to make could you assign some kind of true value to human life. Either
Right.
that or you just didn't want to argue that, you wanted to appease to him as a narcissist. But do you think the fact that you can't say objectively that human beings have some like deeper intrinsic value or like a soul, that is a weakness in what you believe in?
So you're saying if I don't believe that human life has intrinsic value, that's a weakness in my position that there's no such thing as God?
Well, yeah, I'm asking you to give me your opinion if you think that there's a connection there.
If there's a connection there. Well,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. I don't think anything really has any intrinsic value. It's human life has value to us. It has value to me,
Hmm.
and in the end, it doesn't matter that it doesn't have any intrinsic value. Um, it doesn't have to have intrinsic value for life to have value, because ultimately, everything that has value to our perspective, my perspective.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, I can see how it's important, how it could be important that everybody agrees that human life has value,
Right.
and it's it's like that whole thing that what I believe is real is death. It's useful to say that there's some intrinsic value in life,
Hmm.
um, to get us all to agree to it, because
Hmm.
ultimately it's better for us all, for everyone
Hmm.
to have that belief and value
Hmm.
of life. And I do believe in value of life, but I don't believe it's intrinsic, because what does intrinsic ultimately mean? It ultimately means that it has meaning because God gives it meaning. And I don't. That's the only reason. That's the only reason why you could say that life has intrinsic meaning. It has meaning to us. It has meaning because you can't convince Hitler that life has intrinsic meaning because he won't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
So it and what has meaning to him, what has value to him, is what has meaning to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Jeffrey Dahmer was trying to be a Christian for whenever he was younger. I guess he really struggled with his homosexuality, but he was going to church and he was trying to be a good person. He was attempting at it. But he said after he got caught, and I don't know, you can take this for face value or disagree with what he was saying. Maybe he was just trying to get a cop out, but he said the reason why he was doing the things that he did is because he genuinely was an atheist and he didn't believe that humans had any intrinsic value behind them.
Uh-huh.
And I know you can say this guy just had serious moral, mental issues. I get that. I get that argument. But that being said, is he said, after he got caught, how convenient, right? He becomes a Christian again. But he says the belief in God was like keeping him from doing these things that he had wanted to, what he had like this desire to do.
Exactly. And
You
that
know,
would have been useful for him
hmm
to have that, to keep him
hmm
from,
eating people.
yeah, but ultimately he was going to do it, and he was going to find a way to justify it because he was a
Right,
deeply
right,
disturbed person.
right, right, right.
All right, so we're gonna try this again. We're gonna do a sermon, and our sermoner today for this episode is Isaiah himself.
All right,
Give us some God perspective.
all right. So God created us in his image or in his likeness. Ultimately, as created beings, we are always going to be below God. Just as in the same way when we give birth to a child, they're going to be way below us. And even for decades, they will only have a small fraction of the knowledge that we have. But unlike children, God is continually above us. So you see, God has put limits on us from how much we can know to how much we can experience. But as any father, he wants to show us more, and he desires to reveal more of his creation, his intention, and his nature. If there has been something I've learned while traveling, it was absolutely how little I could or will ever know. I remember in a bar in Thailand, I was sipping some Chang beer, and I wondered for a second how many people drank from my exact cup. What had that glass experienced in its life? If it were granted the gift of speech, what amazing tales might it share? Or how about the beer that I was drinking? What mishaps would arise from this specific batch, this family that it had been brewed into? Would it lead to a fight, a car accident, a new baby, an STD? What bouts of creativity might it inspire? Would it be a new invention, a song, or a book, or maybe a movie? What might I experience if I was in the same bar 2 years, 20 years, or maybe even 200 years from now? How many things I will never know. The more I learn about the Bible or grow spiritually, the more it reveals how little I actually understand and how much I need to mature in so many different ways. Truly, the Bible's description of the Bible is like a mirror we can look into. Yet, like a funhouse, which has various types of mirrors, it can show us distorted versions of ourselves, or perhaps with a perfect model figure that we've always dreamed about having. In the movie The Mask, Cher takes her deformed son into a funhouse, and the distorted images it actually produces him to make him look normal. And as he can see a reflection of himself that is like a perfect and higher being than he is at that time. This is what we can have is whenever we look at the Bible, we see the potential of what we could be. The Bible tells us that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom in the book of Proverbs. This isn't fear like something you would imagine from Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, or Chucky, but it is rather a kind of reverence. It is an appreciation of the majesty of his beautiful, amazing nature. Unfortunately, we are incapable of experience most of his greatest creation with our current bodies. But to those who hear the calling and receive his free gift, he has promised new, glorified bodies that can do things that we could never dream possible. In fiction, heroes like a Superman or Neo from Matrix had the gift of flight. But unlike those beings, even if we were granted the gift of flight, we would have to do so very slowly and at a very limited heights. That is due to other issues that would arise, such as frostbite or the thinning of the air at certain high atmospheres. But our new bodies will not have the physical limitations that we have. These bodies may be something closer to a 4D body, or perhaps do things like modify reality at a quantum level, or defy physics in other ways, such as going faster than the speed of light, or even existing in multiple places at the same time. Ultimately, we will have these bodies if we surrender our lives over Jesus Christ and believe that he will resurrect this current physical trash heap that he has given us for now. Amen.
That was good. Thank you, Isaiah, for that wonderful sermon. And I think that'll do it for us tonight. Thank you for listening to the RHE podcast. I am Rob Schock.
It's Isaiah Diesel. Thanks for listening.